illustration of the jar that we have now on the altar that I introduced with our kids, I first learned of it. I've come across it several times. The first time, though, that I learned of it was actually when I was in high school. And it was my math teacher, of all people, who introduced it to me. We came into class one day, and before he even asked for our homework, before he went into the day's lessons, he sat down, he pulled out a jar, like the one I had, and he began to fill it with golf balls. And when it was all full of golf balls, he asked if it was full. And we said, yes, that's pretty full. Like you and we said, that's pretty full. And then he took out golf tees and he started putting those into the crevices. And then he said, is it full? And we said, yes, it's full. We hadn't learned yet. Then he took sand and then water until it was all the way filled up. And then he did the same thing. He took out another jar. And this time he began to fill it up haphazardly, right? He poured in a whole bunch of water first. And then he tried throwing in the sand and the golf balls and the golf tees, and it didn't all fit. And his message to us, we received pretty quickly, was that it matters how we prioritize the time and the energy, the gifts that we have. It matters. And that there will always be those other forces or expectations haphazardly throwing things into our jars. But it matters how we take the time to consider them. And it was only in reflecting on this that I thought, how fitting that this person, this teacher, his name is Mr. Pison, that he, of all people, it makes sense he would be the one to teach us this. Because this is the same teacher who on the top of every single test and assignment wrote the words, be great today. Not do great today, be great today. Here was a teacher who lived that day in, day out, who knew that doing all the great things didn't always equate to being great, who knew that his job, his purpose, was about more than just teaching us the math, though he was really good at that too. But that his purpose was to teach us other lessons that would shape how we lived inside and outside the classroom. And you can tell that that one stuck with me. It matters how we use our time and our energy. And I was thinking about that this morning because as I talked about with the kids, when I read the story from Mark, that's what I hear more than anything, is that Jesus was a man who knew what his purpose was. And he didn't let the other good things that he needed to do that he did, he didn't let that distract him from his purpose. He used those things to fulfill his purpose. And Mark is a whirlwind. The story as we hear it from Mark is a whirlwind of a story. The other Gospels, they give us the birth story so we can kind of understand what's coming next. We have a little time to get ready, to understand what's coming in Jesus. Mark starts out right away, jumps in with 2 feet and says, the beginning of the good news. And then there he is, Jesus, all grown about doing ministry. We've been reading through Mark for a couple of weeks now, and we are still only on day 1 or 2 of his public ministry. He wastes no time. He calls his disciples. He takes them off to the synagogue in Capernaum. He casts out a demon. He then goes over to Simon's house to heal his mother-in-law. And as the people come rushing to the door, he heals them too. Day in, from sun up to sundown, the whirlwind of ministry. And then finally, only under the cover of darkness, is he able to escape for a quiet retreat of prayer. I'm an introvert, and I can almost imagine, feel what it would have been like with the whirlwind of the day to get to that quiet place of prayer again. It just makes my whole body and spirit sigh to have that connection again. And Jesus did that and prioritizes that. And I almost wonder, it's interrupted pretty quickly. Jesus didn't get a lot of time at it before Simon and his friends came looking for him. Actually, if you listened, what Bill read is they came hunting for him. They were hunting him down. They wanted to bring Jesus back because they didn't want him to spend too much time in prayer with all the people at the door in need of something. All the people who needed healing, and the healing was good. There were all these good voices needing something from him. So they called and they wanted to bring Jesus back. I almost wonder if they were thinking already, Simon and his friends, thinking about how great it would be to have a little healing center right there in their village, if Jesus would stay and could heal anyone who decided to come. That wasn't uncommon for that time to have a healing center like that. And it would have met a great need. The thing that makes me wonder, though, is how Jesus so clearly, even in the whirlwind of all of it, answers them no. Jesus isn't going to just settle back down in Capernaum. He knows that his purpose is a good even greater than the good that it would have been to stay there. And so he says to them, no, let's go back on to the neighboring town, to the next place, back into the whirlwind to do it all again, because his purpose is to proclaim the good news to all who will hear it. He says to them, that's what I came to do. He says, when Simon says, come on back, people are needing you in Capernaum. Jesus says, I came to proclaim the good news to all the people. So we can't go back. It's time to go on to somewhere else and to keep going with the good news. Jesus knows his purpose. And if you think about that illustration, he knows how to arrange the things in his jar towards that purpose, to orient everything around it. Because all of those good things that he was about, they were all towards his purpose. He taught so that others would hear the good news. He healed so they would know it in their body. He fed them so they would be sustained for the journey. He cast out the demons so that they wouldn't have anything standing in their way of the good news Jesus proclaimed. Everything Jesus did was about his purpose, but he never let any of it be the only thing. He knew it was all about something else. He knew that he was called not just to create a healing center in Capernaum, but to ultimately go on and be the healing center for all of creation. He could have been a healing center in Capernaum, and it would have been good. But Jesus knew his purpose was to be the healing center for creation. And how much more good that is to proclaim that news for all the world. It would have been so easy for him to have said yes when Simon came and said, come back. There are people who need you right here. Please just stay. Come back. What strikes me about the story is how grounded Jesus is in his purpose and how he keeps on with that. And more so, the role that I believe prayer plays in this story. I think it's not a coincidence that Jesus is able to have time of prayer, and that's when he's able to say to Simon, it's time for me to move on. It's time for us to go to the next place. I think in that time of prayer, he is reminded and renewed for that purpose. For those of us who know the full story of Jesus, who've heard it, again, from birth to death and after, we know that there are critical times in his ministry where Jesus goes back to prayer. Before he even started, when he was tempted in the wilderness, Jesus prayed. Here, at the beginning of his ministry, Jesus prays. How many times when the crowds press around him, Jesus goes back and prays. Sometimes comically so. He sometimes escapes across the sea to get a moment to pray. Before he would go to the cross, we know Jesus goes to the garden to pray. can't help but think how that prayer is so much a part of how Jesus was able to keep going in his purpose. You see, the thing is, I believe that God could have worked through a healing center in Capernaum. Had Jesus said, sure, I'll stay, and gone back with Simon and his friend, I believe God could have worked through it. Because that's what I believe it means for God to be infinitely creative, that God can work through it. God can work through that good. The difference is, I believe it's so much more powerful when God's creative energy and our purpose align. I believe that's the difference between the healing center in Capernaum and Christ on the cross and the empty tomb of resurrection, healing all of creation. Jesus knew his purpose and aligned with God's, and he stayed rooted in that. And so I wonder, what does that mean for us? Where does that leave us? We are people like Christ who know the whirlwind of life. We know what it is to have others at our door needing something, other expectations, other people we care about deeply who need us for something. We know what it is to have deadlines and timelines and inboxes that are too full. We know what that is. We know what it is for someone to say, I really need you to come back and stay. And it's all good. It's all good stuff that we've got in our jars. But I just wonder how different it would be if we were as intentional as Christ to find time to retreat in prayer again and again and to ask God, what is my purpose now? What is it right now for me? To take that time and sit before God with that question. I wonder what our jars would look like. I wonder if things might be rearranged. I wonder if things might be reoriented around that purpose for us. Because I know you. I know your jars are full of so much good. I know how you love one another and care for one another, how you are caregivers, so many of you in that role in different ways. I know how you serve one another, how you feed one another, how you call on one another, how you serve this place in passion, how you serve the community in volunteering. I know how those of you, how you continue to have good conversations with your children, however old they are, to engage the world differently for justice. I know those conversations, you've shared them with me. I know how full your jars are with good. And God, who is infinitely creative, will work through all of it. What I hope for us today is that we would be led to a time of quiet retreat and prayer, so that we could come and be before God, and God could lovingly empty the jar as needed and rearrange it around our God-given purpose. My hope for us is not just a healing center in Capernaum, but to know the healing of resurrection. My hope for us is that we would know and live out of our God-given purposes, and that everything, every good thing that we have in our jars would be oriented around that. So my friends, my hope for you today is quiet retreat and prayer, whatever that looks like for you. Maybe that means journaling, maybe that means rereading this story from Mark. Maybe that means taking a walk on a familiar path where you can lose yourself in the motion of it. Maybe that means asking God again and again with every step, what is my purpose right now? Maybe it means having to find the time under the cover of darkness like Jesus did. Maybe it means having to lock our cell phones in our glove box and just sit in our car a few extra minutes before we go in the house. Whatever that quiet retreat is for you, my prayer is that today you would be encouraged into it. In worship, maybe that's what this is for you. My prayer is communion is a start for that for you. I don't have the answer for you. I can't tell you your purpose, but God can. And God can use all of the good in your jars to accomplish it.